Okay, thanks, Lance. Very encouraging message. Just ordinary people set aside by the blood of Jesus to do extraordinary things, and we have that great pattern to follow. Thank you for that. All right, we'll continue our study tonight in the dwelling place of God, and this will actually be part 2 of last week's lesson. I just want to remind you that our objective is to recognize and gain a deeper appreciation for the house of God. And so we've been tracing the house of God, the dwelling place of God, in each Bible area, from the Garden of Eden, through the tabernacles, to the temples, all the way to where we're headed is beyond, and that is to the church. It seems that God longs to be with His holy people. And the tabernacle, the temples were remarkable structures, and they reflect the magnificence of God. And so far in this ancient story, sinful man has had to be made holy through laws, rituals, sacrifices, offerings to come closer to God. And when Jesus entered the world, this story changed. The arrival of Christ, holy God, came to sinful people. And He fulfilled the law and became the sacrifice for them. We'll find that He makes men holy still. And so in this lesson, we're studying the temple experiences of Jesus and His fellow Jews. Last week we watched a video that showed what that might have looked like. And so far we've seen the Son of God demonstrating what is appropriate in the house of God. Soon we'll begin to recognize and define the temple in the Christian age, but that'll be in the context of the ancient temple and Christ's model. So when He comes to the temple in all of these situations, He's modeling something for us and how to live in the temple and how to be in the temple and how to approach the temple. So let's catch up just a little bit from last week. We noted that our homes are our domains. Joshua said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And so what we do in our house in order to serve the Lord means that there's going to be some things that we do and some things we don't allow. Have you ever had a guest in your home or in your truck or in your workspace that didn't respect their boundaries? Like, for example, have you ever had somebody come into your home who was a salesperson and they wouldn't leave? You were ready to eat dinner or leave to go somewhere or make your phone calls or settle in for the night, and they just wouldn't respect your time. That's a little bit of an offensive thing. Or maybe somebody you like, a friend, and you're driving down the road and they touch your radio station without asking. Or somebody opens your fridge without an invitation. Or somebody announces that they're going to say the prayer at mealtime in your home without being asked to. These are little things a lot of times, but the thing that really rubs us the wrong way is that they're not respecting your dominion. And so our homes, our cars, our workspaces are regarded as our dominion. And further, our dominion extends to our family, our spouses, and our children, not in a domineering or arrogant way, but in a protective way. We care about the way people talk to our wives and where they want to take our children. Violate those boundaries, and you'd better brace yourself. We'll protect the rules of our dominion. We'll protect those who are in our dominion. And we'll see to it that others abide by those rules while they're in our domain. On the outside, we don't have much to say. There's not much we can say. But within our walls, we do have a say. So that's why this study is important and applicable. What Jesus, who is the image of the invisible God, does as a man in the house of God demonstrates His authority and expectations for this domain. So let's look and see what Jesus is doing when He comes into the temple of God. Looking at the episodes revealed about Jesus in the temple, we've been looking in the book of Luke and the book of John, and so far we've noticed from some of our temple lessons that baby Jesus was taken to the temple in Luke chapter 2. And we concluded together that the temple was for holy people. It was for the law, fulfilling the law. It was for glory, and it was for hope. And then we noted that the boy, Jesus, when he was 12 years old, was taken to the temple, and we concluded that the temple was for the Father's business, The temple was a place of teaching and study, even of celebration and safety and of peace, where seekers find the Son. And then we noted that Jesus was taken to the temple, that high place, the pinnacle, where he was tempted. We saw that there was an opportunity for the devil and for temptation, but it was also an opportunity for victory over temptation, where truth was revealed. So not everything that takes place at the temple is God's will. It's not what he wants. There's temptations, there's going to be plotting, and we're going to see these things. But the way that Jesus responds in the temple is the expectation. There was this passage in John chapter 2 where Jesus said, "Take these things away." It was when he was cleansing the temple. And we concluded that the temple was a place of zeal, a place of purity is expected there, where boundaries are held there. There were things that Jesus would not allow to take place in that temple. About the same time, in John chapter 2, Jesus said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it." And he was talking about his body. But there it was at the temple where he made this claim. And so we found that it's also a place of prophecy and life. There was this time when he met the man that he healed. He healed him at the pool of Bethesda right outside the temple there in Jerusalem. And then he confronted him in the temple. And we concluded that it was a place of healing and of wonder and of warning, because he warned that man to not sin any longer. We also noted in John chapter 7 that Jesus was teaching in the temple. A lot of teachings going on there. And we concluded last week that that was a place for teaching, a place of God, a place of boldness, and a place of inspiration. In John chapter 8, Jesus deals with the adulterous woman. And when everybody else wanted to condemn her and to stone her to death, Jesus applied the old law the way that it was intended. And we find that it's a place of teaching, displaying the law it was intended. It was a place of mercy and of warning. All of that took place at the temple. And at the end of that situation, Jesus said, "I am the light of the world." And so we concluded with that the temple is a place of light in an otherwise dark world. And there were those people who brought the adulterous woman there, and there was Satan's plots there. And so they'd like to bring darkness into the temple, but Jesus says, "I am the light of the world." And he proved that he was over and over, and he brought light and wonder and warning and mercy and teachings, enlightenment, all there at the temple. So hopefully we're beginning to see the pattern and expectations that Christ had for the temple. And so tonight we'll just go on and continue this thought for one more night. If you have a Bible close to you, we'll be in John chapter 10 to begin with. We're going to be looking again just in the books of John and in Luke. John chapter 10 is a favorite chapter of mine. It's where Jesus says that he is the good shepherd, and he's the door for the sheep, and all of these things. And then he begins to conclude later on in verse 22. I want to read beginning in verse 22, where we read, "Now it was the feast of the dedication of Jerusalem, and it was winter. And Jesus walked into the temple and Solomon's porch. And the Jews surrounded him and said to him, 'How long do you keep us in doubt? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly.'" So here's Jesus at the temple. We've already shown the many things that he's done at the temple, the many teachings that he's had at the temple. He's already plainly spoke of who he was, that he was the Son of Man, that he's the Son of God. Just a few chapters earlier in John chapter 5, he told them the testimonies of who he was. He says, "If you don't believe me because of my testimony, believe based on Moses, what he wrote, the law, what was written there, on John the Baptist, based on the testimony of my Father, base it on the miracles that I do." He's told them plainly, and that was in chapter 5, who he is. And now they come, he's at the temple, and they say, "Tell us plainly who you are." Well, in the following verses, Jesus tells them who he is. I want to skip down to verse 30. He says something that really offends them. He said, "I and my Father are one." They knew that he was talking about God. And at this, in verse 31, they took up stones to stone him. Because either if he's telling the truth, which they didn't believe, then they should bow down and worship him. On the other hand, if he wasn't telling the truth, then that was blasphemy, and so they wanted to stone him. And conversation continues. For the sake of time, we're just doing a cursory look at these things. We go down to verse 37. Jesus said this, "If I do not do the works of my Father, then do not believe me. But if I do, though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and believe that I and the Father, that the Father is in me, and I in him." Well, then again, they sought a way to kill him. So if he and the Father are one, whose temple is it? And there they are in his house. And they won't listen and they won't comply. And honestly, when he threw out the money changers and the people who were selling, that seems like the least little thing. I mean, if I would have had that stick that Moses was talking about, that Lance was telling us Moses had, I would just, yeah. Pow. Jesus is displaying something important about who the temple belongs to and how to conduct yourself in the temple. So, what would you conclude here? The temple was a place of, for, to, or where? I would simply say that it was a place for teaching about Jesus Christ. Anything else you would add to that based on this short passage? And honoring Christ? Let's look. Yeah, right. A lot of learning about his deity and about the Father. Very true. Nick?
In verse 32, he says, "I've shown you many good works from the Father. For which of them are you going to stone me?" So we see it's a place of good works too.
True. True. And he may be referring to that healing that he did, but it was on the Sabbath and they had a problem with that. But yeah.
Some of it was at the temple.
All right. Let's look at chapter 11. Chapter 11 is a wonderful passage also. We read about the death and the resurrection of Lazarus. And, Lazarus was a friend of Christ. He had two sisters, Mary and Martha. And word came to him that Lazarus was sick and dying, and Jesus waits until he's dead. Then he goes there, and then he tells them, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, shall live." And then he goes and he says, "Lazarus, come forth." And Lazarus came forth. And the one who had died came out of the tomb. Verse 44, he was bound hand and foot with grave clothes. His face was wrapped with the clothes, and Jesus said to them, "Loose him and let him go." And so what's, I think, very interesting is in the following verses, you find that there's a plot to kill Lazarus and Jesus. The one who is the resurrection and the life, the one who brings life, and the one who is resurrected, they want to kill both of them. Well, in this plot to kill Jesus, it begins in verse 56. "Then they sought Jesus and spoke among themselves as they stood in the temple, 'What do you think? That he will not come to the feast?' Both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a command that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it, that they might seize him." And so we have these plots taking place in the temple after raising Lazarus. Earlier, we had noted that Satan had taken him to the temple, a holy place, to tempt him. And now we have the chief priest. Who were supposed to be the protectors of the temple? Remember? The priests. And instead of protecting the temple, they're in there plotting. They're plotting to see how they can kill Jesus. And so we would like to whitewash this, and maybe not recognize that sometimes there's things that should not go on in the temple, but the Bible is clear about it. There are some things that are going on in the temple, even in Jesus' day, that were wrong. It's not God's hope. It's not what he wants. It's not holy, but that's what took place. As we talk about the church later on, Paul's going to make some startling remarks about some things that he's inferring is taking place in the house of God that should not be taking place. So, we have to be careful of that. Anything else in John 11? Nick?
There's a contrast that's being made here, and it's one that I think it stands out to me, and it goes back to verse 55 as to the reason that they're there in the first place. They're there to purify themselves. And so that's the primary purpose, and yet you see what's actually going on. They're plotting, and they're going to arrest him, and so on and so forth. And so there's a big difference between what they're supposed to be doing versus what they're actually doing. And a lot of times in the church you see that take shape today.
Yeah, good point. There's a lot of distractions. And sometimes our desires override what we should be doing. We have to be careful about that. Kim?
Made up. Like, if they asked the question, no matter what he said, it wasn't going to matter.
I agree. It seems like they're very close-minded. And they're not listening to what he's having to say about himself, about his duty, about what the temple is all about. You're right. I think that they've already pretty much made up their mind.
Back in the book of Luke, I think it was the 13th chapter, where Jesus disappeared on him for a couple of days when he was an 11-year-old boy, and the statement that he made to his parents, that he must be about his father's business. It just shows you that there was one in thought, one in mind, one in purpose. He knew what he come here for, and these some of the things that he run into, but he had a hard time convincing people that he was who he said he was.
Right.
How spiritual do you think the Pharisees felt, they're in the temple where God is, and yet they're doing all these unholy things that haven't changed from Israel in Jeremiah's day, which those people were trusting in the prophet that says, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. We're okay, we got the temple here. But look what's going on. They're plotting not against anybody. That would be bad, but what makes this even worse is that they're plotting against the one who dwells in the temple.
Right. Good point. There's not a lot their hearts are very much like some of them of the Old Testament that led to the decline of Israel. And one of the things that C.J. noted was that they may feel spiritual or religious being in the temple, but that does, just being there without the wrong heart, that doesn't make them any more spiritual. Good point. All right, let's take a look at chapter 11. I'm back in Luke now. Matthew, Mark, Luke. Luke chapter 18. Luke 18. And this is a parable about the temple, about a couple people who went to the temple. I'm not quite there yet, am I? Yeah, I am. Okay, Luke 18, beginning in verse 9. Somebody want to just read verses 9 through 14? Nick?
He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but he beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted.
All right, thanks. So this is kind of illustrating what CJ was saying. You know, this Pharisee, he went to the temple to pray, and he prayed, oh, I'm so glad that I'm not like these people. But I think it's interesting, at least in my version, it says he stood and prayed thus with himself. I don't think God was listening to his prayer. He prayed thus to himself. I'm not all of these things. But there was another man who was not a Pharisee, but he went with a very sincere heart, and it was a heavy heart, and he beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. This is the one that God heard, and this is the one that went home justified. But it begins that two men went up to the temple to pray. So the temple is a place for what? That's right, a place for prayer. And you remember when King Solomon was making his dedication in the prayer that he made, he prayed that God's eyes may be open towards the temple night and day, towards the place which he said he'd put his name there, and that he would hear the prayer which the servants makes towards this place. And then he said, and may you hear the supplication of your servant and your people Israel, when they pray towards this place, here in heaven, your dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive. And so later on, Isaiah would say that this is a house of prayer. Jesus is quoted as saying, this is the house of prayer. And so I think, in spite of all the other things that the temple is and represents, it's essentially a house of prayer, a place where prayers ought to be said. Anything else about this at the temple? This parable about the temple. CJ?
So where God justifies in verse 14, he justifies the tax collector for a humble heart. So that's the place where you can get justification.
Yeah, good point. Good point. This is where he went, and he prayed, and he was justified. Garfield?
My statement I made a while ago, it was in Luke, the 2nd chapter, and verse 49, where Jesus was, when he was 12 years old, where he made that statement.
It's a place in the Father's business.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look in Luke chapter 19. Here, Jesus cleanses the temple. And so this is recorded, or I don't know always if it's the same one or if it's different occasions, but it's recorded multiple times in the Gospels. In verse 45, he went into the temple and began to drive out those who bought and sold in it, saying to them, it is written, my house is a house of prayer, but you have made it into a den of thieves. And he was teaching daily in the temple, but the chief priests and the scribes and the elders and the people sought to destroy him, and were unable to do anything, for all the people were very attentive to hear him. And so, again, it's a place where evil is sometimes plotted, where they take liberties where no liberties are meant. It wasn't meant to buy and sell and trade in the temple. They were taking a liberty that wasn't given to them. And Jesus was not happy with this. And he went in there and he drove them out. This is his domain, his dominion. This isn't going to take place while he's there. And so it's also a place then of purity, and a place of restriction, and a place of correction. And again, Jesus says that it's a place of prayer. And it's a place of teaching, where Jesus is heard, where his influence is great. They wanted to destroy him, but they didn't, because they were unable to do anything, for the people were very attentive to hear him. Because of the people who were there, and they were listening, and his influence. It influenced them so much that the people who were plotting didn't stand a chance with their plots at this time, because people were listening and they were attentive to Jesus. And so this all took place at the temple. Anything else about this passage before we move on? Yeah. Well, I don't know if the priests And we've already noted that the priests weren't the protectors of the temple during this time, were they? They were.
So instead of somebody taking their firstborn from their, stock to sacrifice, they were going in and buying, God knows what. In a lot of cases, they were buying animals to sacrifice.
Yeah, sometimes they could do that, but the problem was that it was just it turned into a market. And these people were making money. CJ?
The priests set up to protect the temple so that nobody died approaching the temple. Well, in the New Testament, you have to think, why is nobody dropping down? All these things are happening in the temple. And I think it's because God is no longer there. If God was there, they would be dead. You know that from the Old Testament. The Levites were protecting the people from the wrath of God because he was present.
Okay. All right, let's look at another one. Luke 20. Anybody want to read verses 1 through 8 for me? Luke 20, 1 through 8. Don?
The people in the temple and preached the gospel, that the chief priests and the scribes, together with the elders, confronted him, and spoke to him, saying, Tell us, by what authority are you doing these things, or who is he who gave you this authority? But he answered and said to them, I also will ask you one thing, and answer me. The baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men? And they reasoned among themselves, saying, If we say from heaven, he will say, Why then did you not believe him? But if we say from men, all the people will stone us, for they are persuaded that John was a prophet. So they answered that they did not know where it was from. And Jesus said to them, Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things.
Okay, thank you. So this is the way this chapter starts out. Jesus is going to the temple. He's preaching the gospel. And then he goes on with a number of other teachings. In verses 9 through 19, he talks about the parable of the wicked vine dresser. And then he addresses the taxes to Caesar. And then later he talks to the Sadducees about the resurrection. And then he talks about David calling the Son Lord. And there's a lot of complicated things in here, but it starts out complicated too. Jesus went into the temple to teach. And he's preaching the gospel. Some versions read the good news. Well, the chief priests and the scribes, they gathered together and they confronted him. I'm telling you, if it was like that coming here to preach and teach, and every time you came here there was somebody to confront you, I wouldn't want to preach or teach here anymore. You've got good news to share. And they come up and they confront him over and over and over and try to tangle him up and try to get him to say something that would indicate that they should stone him. And it was just a mess with them people coming every time. Now, the thing that I want to say is that there was also people who were sincere, and he always had an audience, and they were listening, and they were becoming disciples. So I don't think this was the majority, but this was an element in that. So one thing that I would point out is that this is a place, the temple is a place where the gospel is preached, where Jesus has authority, his lessons are expounded. Anything else about the temple in this passage? All right, let's look at Luke 21. Still at the temple, the next chapter, verse 1, he looked up and saw a rich man he saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. And he also saw a certain poor widow putting in 2 mites. So he said, Truly I say to you, that poor widow has put in more than all. For all these out of their abundance have put in offerings for God, but she out of the poverty put in all the livelihood that she had. I'd like to be I guess, a fly on the wall when this happened. I just imagine Jesus standing there with his apostles, and he's just looking and watching. I like to people watch. Jesus is watching, and he sees something interesting happening. The rich people are coming in, and they're throwing their coins in. They can probably hear it clang all the way down and get some attention. And then you hear plop, plop, 2 little mites. The smallest of the coins, the least amount. But yet this was her livelihood. And Jesus also knew that it was. And he says, she's put in more than all of them. Yeah, they put more coins in, but she, percentage-wise, she put in 100%. So this is a place of offerings. And it's also a place where Jesus takes notice. Remember in the Revelation story, he's among the churches. And he knows what they're doing. Ephesus, Smyrna, all those places. He knows what they're doing. And so there in the temple, literally, he's watching. He knows what's going on in the temple. Anything else about the temple and Jesus' experience there in Luke 21? Nick?
A lot of places where you'd have the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor together, and yet here in the temple you have that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. It's diverse. Age, money, race, it's one place.
Before, he just got condemning the Pharisees and the scribes and the priests for devouring widows' houses. All the money that they had, their long flowing robes and everything, they were stealing. They were supposed to be helping her, not her giving money to them. So there's a contrast. In the chapter, you kind of miss that. There's a contrast between them devouring the widow and the widow actually supporting them.
Yeah, wow, that's a good idea to point out. Thank you. Garfield?
A coin at home is called the widow's mite. The guy bought it and gave it to me, and it's sort of flat, and it's about the size of a head of a pencil eraser. That's how big that mite is. If you threw 2 of them in there, you just barely hear them trickle, they go down through there.
Right. Just a little. Small copper coin, my margin says. Yeah. Yeah. Lance.
Was, poor in a physical sense, but she was probably also poor in spirit, because that was all she had.
Mm-hmm.
What else is there besides her Lord?
Yeah. Probably. She was broke multiple ways. Commended by Jesus, though. And I think that's interesting. Sometimes, maybe we gather together, and I've known people who, it's just a busy time when we're together on Sundays. And maybe somebody's offended that somebody didn't say hi to them, or they got overlooked for this reason or that reason. And Jesus sees. He knows. And even if somebody else doesn't see us, he does. And I think that's an important thing to remember. All right, let's look at another one. In Luke chapter 21 still, verse 5 and 6. Then some of them spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and donations. And he said, these things which you see, let me start over. Let me take my glasses off so I can see. These things which you see, the days will come in which not one of the stones shall be left upon another, that shall not be thrown down. So, Jesus predicts the destruction of the temple. Remember, he also said, this temple will be destroyed. In 3 days I'll raise it. And he was talking about his body there. But there's another temple, the body of Christ, which is the church, will not be destroyed. And so, yes, the temple, and that temple was a place that was destroyed. But also it's the foreshadow of a greater temple to come. And we're part of that. Nick?
Body too, because it's going to be destroyed, but it won't be destroyed forever. He'll be raised on the 3rd day.
All right, 21. Now we go to the end of the chapter. 37 through 38. Somebody want to read those two verses? Same chapter, end of the chapter. Please, Everett.
Every day he was teaching in the temple, but at night he went out and lodged on the mount called Olivet. Early in the morning, all the people came to him in the temple to hear him.
All right. So after detailing the destruction of the temple, he went out, but he was back early in the morning, and all the people came to the temple to hear him. I don't blame him. Wouldn't you be there if you knew Jesus was the speaker that day? We have a guest speaker coming in May. I hope you're all here for that. But if I said Jesus is going to be here in May, I think everybody would be here for that. And so here he is at the temple, and the people come early in the morning. And so I think that it was a place where Jesus was eager to be, and it was a place where his followers were eager to be also. Nick?
A lot about someone by the things that they'll do to accommodate, like going early someplace. You remember when Black Friday was a big deal and people would camp out the night before trying to stay in line to get the good deals and all that. They do stuff like that to save a few $100s on a TV or something. But imagine if you've got the Son of God there in the temple, and to their credit, there's people there that were there to hear him. Some people probably couldn't be bothered to go across the street to hear him, which is unfortunate.
Our schedules say a lot about our hearts.
Yeah.
And so here we know where Jesus' heart was and where his followers' heart was too. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next chapter, in chapter 22 and 52 and 53. Jesus had just finished praying in the garden, and when he arose, there was people coming to get him. In verse 52, Jesus said to the chief priests and the captains of the temple and the elders who had come to him, "Have you come out as against a robber with a sword and a club?" In verse 53, "When I was with you daily in the temple, you did not try to seize me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness." And so he's not at the temple at this place, but he references it. Here they come to him in the night in darkness with their clubs and their torches and everything. And Jesus says, "I was with you daily, in the daytime, early in the morning. And you guys didn't say anything." Well, they did confront him, but they didn't try to do anything like this because this was a dark time. And so the temple is a place of daylight, without darkness and without hiding. And Jesus was there, and there was no pretense about him. But when he's away from the temple, and he's away from the crowds, now they have him, or they think they do. Anything else about Jesus' comments here?
One, you said Jesus was here speaking, when people come. He is speaking.
Yeah. Daryl's making the point that when we're preaching the Word and we're looking at the words of Jesus here, he's speaking. This is how he speaks. So it shouldn't be different, should it? Nick?
About why they're doing it in the dark and not in the light. It's because the light exposes what's in the darkness. They don't want people to know what they're doing. If people could see what they were doing, they'd be embarrassed by it. That's why they wait in the dark. But in the temple, and you can think about this in that literal sense, but also in a spiritual sense, the light exposes what's in the darkness. And they were going to be exposed had they done it in the temple. And that's what they're trying to avoid.
Even going back 2 or 3 chapters where they were saying, well, who's authority? He says, well, if we choose this, the people will stone us. They knew that if they tried to do it in the daytime, or when disciples, the crowds were around him, there'd be no way they couldn't do it any other way.
People of darkness had to do their work in the darkness. CJ?
word daily is powerful to me, Jesus.
I'm sorry, say it again?
The word daily is powerful for me. Jesus is daily in his temple. And I think that's what Solomon prayed for back in First King David. May you always be attentive to your temple. And we see when
just looking at the Old Testament and the history of God's people, Israel is always going to him and then going far, far away from him each time. And here we are 2,000 years later, and the best of the best, the chief priests, the best that the land should have to offer, are doing these deeds in the dark. So that just shows you how lost we are as humanity, really, without our Savior.
Shirley?
I know, I've read in the Bible where it's, where people used to walk really far to hear Jesus, and here we could drive. You know, how many people would go.
Yeah. Right. So Jesus was there daily. He was sleeping on the Mount of Olives, and then he would come back, and the people would come there early. And so it wasn't like they could get in their heated cars and their... I know we have a very bumpy road to get down through, and I appreciate you all enduring that road. That really was something. The road's not easy to navigate, but you're right. We have it so much easier.
It's here in America, because we've just grown soft. I have a friend that goes to India every year for 45 days and preaches over there. And there are people that literally walk days to the gospel meeting that they're putting on.
Right.
People will, and then they'll sleep on the ground that night and then get up and then walk 2 or 3 days to get back home.
And people's schedules, people's difficulty in their travel really does tell us something about where our hearts are.
Well, here has probably heard of Marshall Peeble. He said he started out walking, preaching, and he got so tired, he figured he better get him a mule and a wagon. So he rode in that for a while, and he finally got him a vehicle. He said, I wore the tires off that thing. And I was lucky enough to get in a jet and go preach the gospel.
Yeah, he wrote a book about that. I can't remember what the name of it is, but yeah, from mules to jets or something.
I
Yeah.
heard my mom talk about when they were youngsters, they used to go to a gospel meeting. She talked about, if nobody had cars back then, they'd walk high as 5 or 6 miles to go to a church building. And they usually walk in groups and come home at night. It just shows you how easy we got it today. And sometimes we still forsake the assembly.
All right, well, let's keep on this. We have at least one more place to look at, Luke 23. This did not take place at the temple, but something happens in the temple during this time. Jesus is on the cross, and he is about to die. Verse 44 through 49. Somebody want to read that passage for me? CJ?
Now it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over all the earth until the man fell. Then the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. And when Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. So it happened. So when the centurion saw what had happened, he glorified God, saying, Certainly this was a righteous man. And the whole crowd who came together to that sight, seeing what had been done, beat their breasts in return. And all his acquaintances and the women who followed him to Galilee stood at a distance watching these things.
Okay, thank you. So, I don't know how many of you have ever been with somebody as they passed. Many of us have. And it's something that you'll never forget. And this is the moment where Jesus passed. And it's written down for us. And something happened that's recorded here that took place in the temple. In verse 45, did anybody catch that? What happened in the temple when Jesus died? Yeah, the veil. The veil was torn. That place that separated the holiest place. Matthew records it too, and Matthew writes, Behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks split. So my understanding in that veil, remember how we read about all of the curtains and the ornate parts of them and the clasp and all that, and they were purple and red and blue and all of that. My understanding is that this was a very, very thick curtain. Like it was more like a wall. I don't know, I've heard this, I don't remember where I read it or who said it, but it was like maybe a foot thick. It was very heavy, very thick. It's not something that you're just going to take like a t-shirt and rip up for a rag, not like that. In fact, the other interesting thing that it was torn from the top to the bottom. And so this is what happened at the temple. It must be from God. A place where God's prefigured hope to bring mankind into his presence had served its purpose. And the curtain that symbolized mankind's isolation now symbolizes the opportunity to come close. So let's preview just a little bit here. From last week, we read that, or we concluded that the temple was a place for holy people, for fulfilling the law, for glory and hope. For the Father's business to take place of teaching and of study, a place of celebration and safety and peace where seekers find the Son. The temple was a place of opportunity for the devil and temptation and victory over temptation and for truth to be revealed. It was a place of zeal where purity is expected and boundaries are held. It was a place for prophecy and for life. It was a place of healing and wonder and warning. It was a place for teaching and truth, a place of God, a place of boldness and inspiration, a place of teaching for displaying the law the way it was intended, of mercy and of warning. It was a place of light in an otherwise dark world. And this week we find that the temple is a place of purity and prayer, a place of teaching where Jesus is heard. Sometimes it was a place for evil people to plot, but it was also a place for the gospel to be preached, and Jesus has authority there. It was a place where offerings are made and where Jesus notices. A place destroyed but foreshadowing a greater one to come. A place Jesus was eager to be. A place of daylight. A place without darkness nor hiding. A place for all people to come close to God. And this is what Jesus showed us or told us in his temple experiences. Except for the evil plotting by the insincere hypocrites, all these things are the church. Not the building, but the real place of God's dwelling. In Ephesians 2:19 and 22, we read, "You are members of the household of God. You are built together for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit." And by looking at how Jesus interacted at the temple, we get a feel for what that temple today should include. Any other thoughts before we close? Next week I want to continue looking at how does this new temple compare with other temples at this time in history. For example, there was a temple in Ephesus, which I understand was one of the great wonders of the world. But now that this temple's curtain is torn, and we know in a few years it'll be completely destroyed, there's a new temple emerging where God lives among his people. How does this temple compare with the practices and the structures of other temples, especially the one in Ephesus? So we'll take a look there next week. Thanks for your attention, everybody.